satanic pics.
So I've always loved scary stuff, films, books, and games, but never believed in anything paranormal. I'll admit that I'd had some weird stuff happen, but I'd ignore it and shrug it off. I mean, there must be a rational explanation. But then, a few years ago, my friend wanted to do one of those paranormal ghost hunts that was taking place in our local area. I thought, you know what, why not? I've watched loads of TV ghost hunts and all that. It'll probably be fun. And it was for the most part. The building we went to had a really horrible history, but there was a big roaring fire and comfy seats, and the atmosphere was cozy rather than scary. They even fed us loads of tasty food as well. It felt like we had gathered around to tell scary stories. Honestly, I never felt frightened once. A couple of strange things happened, and a spirit box clearly said my name, but that definitely wasn't evidence of the paranormal. I put it down to coincidence. In the middle of the night, the investigators got a Ouija board out though and asked for some volunteers. My friend and another person in the group wanted to do it, so I decided to join too. It started spelling out words almost immediately too, and I didn't pay much attention to what it said because I was so focused on watching the other two to catch them out moving the pointer. I wasn't moving it, so obviously it had to be one of them. Except, I was paying such close attention that I realized that there were times only my finger was touching the pointer and it still moved. I didn't understand how and asked to look at the board at the end because I was convinced that there must be magnets or something on there. As soon as it was done, out of nowhere I realized I was really tired, just totally exhausted. One of the people in charge of the group, who said that he was a psychic, seemed really concerned, and I had to reassure him I just wasn't used to being up that hour. I'd been up since before 6 a.m. and it was now 4 a.m.-ish, so I just wanted my bed and chose to leave early. I got home, gave my dog some attention, and I went to sleep. But it was the next morning that I heard some weird noises that seemed to be coming from the door when I was in the bathroom. I thought it was quite weird, but I just sort of ignored it. Probably a draft or vibration from somewhere. I went into my bedroom and started getting dressed for the day. Heard my dog being silly on the other side of the bed behind me. He was a GSD and very big, so he was making quite a bit of noise. Sounded like he was digging under my bed, in fact. I turned around to talk to him and see what he was doing, and when I did, he wasn't there. I checked under the bed and all around the room, but nothing. In fact, my dog was downstairs the entire time. This actually freaked me out because I definitely know what I heard. Over the next couple of weeks, too, I checked for mice because, what else could it have been? This is when smaller things started to happen, though. From stuff like being certain I saw something move on the other side of the room in the corner of my eye, to strange noises. Sometimes things would just fall. A book falling off the table or a stack of plates clattering on the drying rack. I ignored a lot of this. Like, oh, I just heard a plate hit against another plate in the kitchen. Must be a draft in there or something. Other stuff, though, I really couldn't explain. Like, once, I was home alone and I just cleaned around the house and had been chilling on the sofa watching some TV, when I decided to get a drink or whatever. I walked into the kitchen and saw some fruit roll through the length of the counter. The fruit bowl is really tall and, there's no way any fruit would just jump out like that. It was only about a third of the way full as well. Nobody else was in the kitchen and really, I just could not explain that one. And then some things that happened were, just downright frightening. You see, I'd been home alone and I'd hear someone walking around upstairs. It was a different sound to the usual creaks, I know that much. More than once, I woke up to my dog standing in the doorway of my bedroom growling. He was never much of a growler, and that really terrified me. I would always go and check, expecting an intruder, but there was never anyone there. The worst thing by far, though, that happened was the last. It was a weekend morning, really bright and sunny. I woke up super early that morning, let my dog outside, and we went back up to bed. I had a coffee and a book, and I was just planning on chilling out for a bit. After a bit, my boy jumped off the bed and looked out of the bedroom doorway, then just sort of laid down, so I went back to my coffee and book. And out of nowhere, there was the loudest crash that came from the loft. I jumped, my dog jumped up, and then it sounded like something was falling down the loft staircase. There was noise of running up and down the stairs, and honestly, it was like all hell broke loose. I could have sworn, based on the noise, that there were at least 20 people up there just throwing things as hard as they could off the floor and the walls, kicking things and running around like crazy. I could hear things smashing, and it went on for a while as well. I was absolutely mortified and terrified, and I could have sworn that there were people up there. I heard running on the stairs but couldn't see anyone, and when it stopped, neither of us dared move. I didn't take my eyes off the stairs, and eventually I went up with my phone ready to call emergency services, but there was nobody there, and the weirdest thing was, there was nothing out of place. Honestly, I have no explanation for any of that. I shared this elsewhere, and someone reached out and told me to ignore it as best as I could and it would go away. And it did, and this was years ago. I'm in the same house though, and recently I've had a few more weird experiences happen that has left me feeling unsure whether or not it's actually gone or not. I have read somewhere that weird experiences can restart any time, and that honestly really freaks me out. But has anyone else had a long break and things start up again? The stuff that happened before just doesn't even seem real to me, but I know what happened. I don't want it to come back, and if there's something that I can do, then honestly, please do share with me, because this is all just a bit too much. I'm sorry if this is a bit of a long one, but there have been a few strange happenings in my life in the past 24 hours, and I feel like there's a lot of background info needed for all of it to make any sense. So to begin, both of my parents are dead. I'm 24, female now, but my mum passed when I was 15 and my dad just 9 months later when I was 16. Mum passed in a car accident, and Dad, well, he ended his own life. My dad was a firefighter for most of his life, and both parents struggled with addiction. I'm not sure how relevant that is, but just so you have all of the info, I think it's worth knowing. So, here's where it really starts. I was standing in the corner of my kitchen this morning, huge open floor plan, so my back was to the rest of the apartment. I was making myself some breakfast when I hear what is distinctly a man taking a deep breath or a sigh. It sounded like it was right behind me, so I spun around. Obviously, nothing was there though. It's early morning, my cats were sleeping upstairs and wouldn't be able to make that noise regardless. No electronics were on at all because my roommate and I unplugged them last night due to a lot of thunderstorms in our city. My roommate was asleep, and he sleeps with tape over his mouth. Don't ask, he's a mouth breather, so he couldn't have made the noise either. Not to mention that his room is on the other side of the kitchen, not behind me. I genuinely have no idea what could have made that noise, other than some kind of an entity, really. After that, I finish getting ready and I go to work. I tell my co-workers what happened, and I started to kind of piece together some other things that have been going on lately and connect them a bit. For example, last night at work, I got 2 phone calls within 5 minutes of each other, and both of them just said goodbye in a man's voice and hung up. My roommate also left a candle burning in the shared bathroom overnight, and my dad, the firefighter, spent my whole life drilling fire safety into my head. But yesterday, I was going through a bunch of my things and spring cleaning essentially, and ended up finding a few of my dad's things that I've never seen before. even though I've gone through these things dozens of times in the almost 8 years that he's been gone now. But I found a very cryptic note with things written on it like despair, pain, loneliness, darkness, etc. And at the bottom, my name was written and circled. I also found a cassette recorder with my dad's voice on it. I've been getting splitting headaches for the last 2 days too, when I normally don't get them at all. The noise itself sounded like it came from the corner directly behind me, and the only things there are a wax warmer and one of my dad's old bottles from his house, which has its own very creepy backstory. But lastly, to get to my apartment, you have to walk up a stairwell that has motion sensor lights. For the past couple of days, the light has been flickering just non-stop. So, all of that by itself, while still very alarming, could be kind of ignored. But then I get home from work today, open the door to the stairwell. The light is still flickering until I'm standing directly below it, because as soon as I get underneath it, it stops flickering and is working normally. I stood there for almost a full minute and took a video of it to show my roommate, and the second that I turned around to keep going up the stairs, it started to flicker again. I really don't know what to make of any of this or where to go from here, so any advice or thoughts as to all of this genuinely would be greatly appreciated. I'll preface this with a question. Do you ever get a sinking feeling of impending danger? Because I did, in the backwoods around Solomon Hill, Berkshire, UK. Just a feeling that the vibe of a place is completely rotten, when moments ago it was almost idyllic. So I got the weekend to myself, as my partner is away for a few days. Something that I like to do is go for night drives, and stop by somewhere in the sticks and go for a peaceful walk when not too many people are around. So I got in the car and put in the directions to a little car park in some woods about 10 miles away. As I drive down the motorway, the sun's very nearly set. It looked great, in fact, everything bathed in orange. I leave at the junction and the motorway becomes dual carriageway, which in turn becomes single B road. I turn off into the lane and pass through the last village before a nice bit of hilly conifer woodland looms large in the twilight. I was going here particularly because I heard that there was a nice viewpoint of Reading Town, but in the end, I don't make it that far. Now, I'm going up country tracks, single lane only, so I'll have to pull over to let someone past if they're going the other way. That doesn't happen. No one else is on the road, in fact. The hedgerows give way to the woodland. It's very pretty and I can still hear birdsong in the dying light. Eventually I reach the car park, although really it's just a patch of gravel for turning around, and a forestry commission gate blocks off the dirt track deeper into the woods. In the car park there's a motorhome, although it looks like no one's in it. There's also a dark blue Ford Fiesta EcoBoost with a fella in it on his phone. I park in the corner, behind the motorhome and 2 spaces over from the Ford and get out. There's a meadow across the road from the car park, so I walk to that to see if there's a path that may lead to the viewpoint. I've not been here before. No viewpoint, but there is a single deer, which was nice. After that, I cross over again and decide to use the track behind the forestry gate. Even if I don't find the viewpoint, it will be a really nice walk, I think, and begin walking. The man in the little car isn't on his phone anymore, and he gets out. I take a few more steps, but I'm already feeling a little bit creeped out, like a creeping dread is starting to shift in. I look over at the man. There's now a second man, and the pair of them are dressed in dark, practical clothes with boots. They're very tall. They don't say anything to each other. Their faces are made of stone, in fact. I've sort of stopped now. I pretend to be on my phone. I try not to look directly, but out of my peripheral I catch them taking turns to sneak looks at me. So I look at them directly, and one is just watching me as they walk towards the same path that I was about to head down. I just sort of stand there as they walk by, and they keep looking at me in alternation, even turning their heads as they're in front of me now to look at what I'm doing. They disappear behind some hedges, looking at me one more time before they go. That dread feeling, the rotten feeling, is very strong. I've had this danger feeling only twice before. One time the danger was perceived, the other time very immediate. At this point, I decide absolutely not, and I go straight back to my car and I get in. I can see the men again, and from the car I can see around the bushes, and they just sort of stood there, watching me. The entire time I got ready and drove out of the car park, turning onto the road, they just stood there, watching. Now, I hope that I was just being paranoid, but I think I know the difference deep down. Paranoia makes you jump at your own shadow and feel anxious. This feeling was cold and a solid feeling in my gut. You become hyper-aware of your surroundings, but also the object of your dread, and in this case, it was definitely these men. I just had a terrible feeling about them, unlike any other stranger that I'd come across. But what do you guys think? Was I overreacting, or does anyone else get the feeling that I'm talking about? Have you had it before, and if you have, where and when? Something about those men just wasn't right, and I'm really glad that I listened to my gut. This happened last summer when I, female and 18, was 17, went out with a friend, female and 19, at the time she was 18, for a stroll in the woods. We live near a big forest. So when leaving the forest, I kind of noticed that something was just off. So I turned back and there was a really tall guy, almost 2 meters, standing right behind me, only leaving a little bit of a gap between me and him. He looked very pale, had blue shorts and white stripes on and a dirty white top. He had pretty big and dark eye bags, blondish white hair, and looked like he was in his mid-20s if I had to guess. I instinctively took a step back, and my friend, out of panic, did the same. The guy stood still and asked us if we were interested in doing, well, you can probably guess, and if we were lesbians, and that he would have some nice friends at his place. My friend, thank God, told him friendly enough that we weren't interested, and the creep turned back without saying anything, and left the way that we took to get out of the woods and walked back in. We took separate ways to get home instantly because of both of us being creeped out. I told my older sister when I got home, and her face turned pale while I was telling her. She asked some questions about the guy, and she told me that this guy sounds like her stalker from school time. Apparently, this guy lived in a little village that was near the woods, and to this day, I've been way too scared to go into the woods there again, even if it is with my friends. I just hope that I never see this guy again in my life, and I also hope that he stays away from my sister. Many years back, I dated a man-child, relatively the same age as myself. We got along pretty well. He presented gentlemanly, hospitable, kind, and loving. In hindsight, things escalated quite quickly. We went from being friends to being exclusive within a month. Not enough time to truly know someone, I know that. This story is quite lengthy, and I'll do my best to shorten it without leaving out integral details. So please, do bear with me. We saw each other daily. We mostly hung out at his home. That was fine with me in the beginning, as I'm rather introverted anyway. A couple of months into our relationship, I started to question why we weren't leaving the house, why we weren't going out and experiencing new things and trying out new hobbies. His responses were always cloudy. He always tried to redirect the conversation, thinking that I was truly stupid and couldn't tell that this was an obvious avoidance tactic. That was the point where I started to become curious though, and from there it all went downhill. Now, I'm not an intrusive person by any means, but considering that he was my partner, I had a right to inquire as to why we were isolating ourselves like this. After some mild questioning for a few weeks, I noticed that he began to create distance. This noticeable change was hard to ignore, in fact, and pretty much confirmed my suspicions. However, I'm not going to make a decision based on assumptions. I'm ashamed to admit this too, but one night while he was sleeping, I actually went through his phone. I still feel pretty disgusted, even though I found like 100% proof that I was the side chick. I couldn't believe it. I still can't. I was with this person daily, and it obviously confirmed why we were so confined to his home. But it was perplexing because she had no idea about me. It was about 2 a.m. when I looked through his phone. There was nowhere that I could sleep beside him for the remainder of the morning, so I quietly got out of bed, collected my things, and I went home. The next day, I believe that he realized what had happened. However, he never contacted me to see why I left. Things remained silent for the entire day, and then I received a phone call later that evening. I confronted him. Again, I'm ashamed to say that I did take photos of the evidence, as I knew that he would try to gaslight me. The fury in his voice, though, was palpable. He did what a usual abuser would do, and blamed me for going through his phone while totally ignoring his infidelity. It was utterly pathetic, really. He had created this delusion that I was going to contact the other girlfriend and tell her all of the wrongdoings, all of his infidelity, lying and cheating, etc. I would have done this. However, while I was looking through the phone, I realized that this girl was very sheltered. She was completely oblivious to what was going on, and I was afraid that he would retaliate against myself and her, and I thought to myself that eventually she would find out anyway. I do regret not informing her. However, my decision was my decision, and I can't change that. But this is where my nightmare begins. He was so paranoid and confident that I was going to contact his girlfriend that he would constantly call me daily and make vague threats against me. I persistently advised him that I would not contact her, that it was none of my business, that she would eventually find out that he was a deceitful, inept brainworm sooner or later anyway. All I wanted was for him to leave me alone and to never speak with me again. That was really my only request. He obviously didn't take my words well, and he continued to harass me. Only a few days later, things completely erupted. His paranoia exceeded levels that I'd never seen before. He sent me a threatening message with the context being, "I have compromising photos of you and I'll release them," as he believed that I would ruin his relationship. I couldn't believe the delusion. No matter what I said, no matter how I phrased it, I even had my mother speak with him at one point, but it was useless. I sent him a message stating that if this was true and if he messaged me again that I was going to call the cops. 5 minutes later, I received 11 messages in succession. A few were videos, photos, and personalized animations of myself. I had never seen these images or videos and animations before. These were taken without my consent. These were extremely intimate and compromising too. Unbeknownst to me, he had cameras set up all around his room. These weren't just threats. These were screenshots of these images, videos, and animations uploaded on various sharing sites. Luckily, he lacked intelligence. He sent me the evidence. There was nothing that I could do to stop the uploads, but I immediately went to the police. They did manage to take some down. However, there were no promises, as once a photo was uploaded, it could be immediately archived. This has forever altered my life too. I don't see relationships the same. I cannot be intimate. I can't form strong bonds. I've become apathetic. I'm forensically observant. I have difficulty trusting everyone, even my family, and so much more. In conclusion, the police were rather efficient and treated me very well, which I'm thankful for. I was granted an immediate protection order, family violence order as well. He broke that quite quickly and called my phone trying his best to apologize, begging me to drop the charges. He was so pathetic that he got his mother to ring me and tried to persuade me. I immediately called the police again and they took immediate action. This ended up going to court and I won. It's really not the result that I wanted. However, he did get his name on that good old sex offenders registry list, which is far more egregious than people may think. Nevertheless, this is beyond life-changing, and to all who may have gone through this, I'm really sorry for you and I feel your pain. Thanks for listening to my story. I know it's a bit long, but I hope that it was good and I hope you got something out of it. I guess the moral of this story is to be careful around people who you think you trust. I know that that's quite nihilistic and pessimistic, but these are some of the unfortunate aspects of life. It's quite paradoxical, I know. Humans are social creatures, but many humans, like this guy, are just absolute rats. So, to start this off, I was deployed to Kadena, AFB, late 2023. I was put into on-base lodging along with another body. After working my shift, I went straight to bed. I was asleep for a solid 4 hours until my roommate woke up to shower. I sleep kind of light, so it did wake me up. At this time, it was probably about 4 in the morning, after checking my phone. He apologized for waking me up, but I told him not to worry about it and to have a good day as he left. At this point, I shift my position and brought the covers over my shoulder. Then, shortly after, my blanket that had been over my shoulders was suddenly pulled back down. I was just about to fall asleep when that happened, so I was still fairly awake, but I ended up texting my buddy, who is an E6 tech sergeant, about what had happened, and he was freaked out for me too. He couldn't believe it, but he knew that I wasn't lying. I then called my wife, since she was awake in the States, to tell her my experience, and she didn't like it at all. She was sort of in disbelief, but also knew that I wouldn't lie about anything like this. I've heard stories about being here and it being haunted, but I never thought that I would ever experience anything like this. And it just had to be one of the freaky things that no one wants to experience, right? To those who have listened to the story, thanks for listening, and for those who have been stationed there, do you have any stories that you want to share? Because I would like to know your experience also, and know that I'm not alone. This was over 10 years ago, but I'll never forget it. So my friend, male and 18, and I, male and 17, would always hang out, either skateboarding, playing video games, and smoking weed. We were still young enough that we were hiding it from our parents, and would go out on walks or to nearby forests to smoke. One evening, it was about 6 p.m, and we decided that we would go to the nearby forest to have a smoke. This forest did have some walking paths, and a really cool man-made stair set that was embedded in the dirt of a really steep incline. There was even a long railing made accompanying the stairs. When we arrived at this stair set, it was about 7 p.m, and there was still lots of light left outside. We decided that we would sit at the top of the stairs for our smoking spot. We were chatting, smoking, having a good time just sort of hanging out. After we had smoked a bit, we remained sitting at the stair set, and we both got pretty quiet. Not for any particular reason, but suddenly I felt or heard this indescribable boom. It caught me off guard. However, what really scared me was the fact that this feeling or noise seemed to come from every direction, including from underneath the ground. I remained silent for a moment afterwards, absorbing what I had just experienced. I looked over at my friend and asked him if he felt anything too, trying to confirm if I was just high and imagining things. But he confirmed that he experienced it too, and at that, I felt my stomach drop a bit. As we were discussing the sound, we didn't notice that within about 5 minutes that the whole forest had been shrouded in fog, and it was beginning to get dark. This was pretty strange, we both thought. Considering what we had just experienced, but kind of played it off as my friend went to smoke again. Just before he went to light his bowl, though, there was this shrill or scream that shot through the forest. It sounded relatively distant, but close enough to make us freeze. The scream was long, high-pitched as if a woman had screamed, and echoed everywhere. Again, we heard the scream, and louder and more distinct this time. Finally, there was a third scream that tapered off, and then it just went dead silent. We were surrounded by fog, and it was getting darker and darker all of a sudden. And so at this point, we decided that that was enough. We got up, packed up, and we left, both being very uncomfortable with the series of events that had just taken place. We got out of the forest, which takes about 20 minutes or less, and when we did, there was no fog to be seen anywhere. In the following days, we played off the whole experience and didn't really talk about it too much, chalking it up to a weird experience at most. We ended up losing touch with each other later on, and we ended up getting back together several years later for his wedding. And it was then that I brought up the experience to him, and he remembered it just the same, and we both kind of laughed about it, I guess. It still gave me chills talking about it, and having the confirmation that we both experienced the same thing was very unnerving. But as much as the screams were strange, I'll never forget that boom and the feeling and the noise of it. It felt, I don't know, otherworldly.